I never thought a piece of paper could change my whole life. That's what I tell people now whenever they ask why I don't believe in mistakes made by men with badges anymore. That day started like any other. I was just an ordinary man, tired after work, holding my paycheck, planning to deposit it and go home. Nothing special, except for the color of my skin. The bank sat on the corner of Madison Avenue, an old brick building that smelled like ink and disinfectant. I walked in holding my $847 check. The teller, a blonde woman with a tight ponytail, looked at me, then at the check as if it had walked in by itself. I smiled politely. "Good afternoon, ma'am. I'd like to deposit this into my account." She didn't smile back. "Did you write this check?" she asked flatly. "No," I said. "It's my paycheck. From work." She stared a second longer, then took it and disappeared into the back. I waited, hands in my pockets. A few people glanced my way. An older white woman in line whispered something to the man behind her. I caught a few words. "Looks suspicious." 5 minutes passed. Then 10. I cleared my throat. "Excuse me, is there a problem?" No answer. A man in a suit, probably the branch manager, came out. He smiled, but his eyes were cold. "Sorry, sir, Julian, is it? Could you have a seat for a moment?" I nodded, confused but polite. Then I saw him pull out his phone, speaking quietly to the security guard. A chill ran down my spine. 3 minutes later, the glass doors opened hard. 2 police officers stepped inside, one hand already near his weapon. "Hands up!" the older one barked. "You're under suspicion of passing a fraudulent check." I blinked. "Wait, what? No, this is a misunderstanding. Quiet." "Face the wall!" he shouted. I raised my hands slowly. "Officer, please." "You can call my employer, they'll confirm." I didn't even finish the sentence before his fist hit me square across the mouth. The sound was dull, heavy, final. Blood filled my mouth, metallic and hot. I stumbled, crashing to the floor. Somewhere behind me, a woman screamed. The floor was cold. I could taste blood. A phone camera clicked nearby. Someone was filming. I tried to speak. "My name is Julian Vance. I work for Monroe Tech. The check is real." "Shut up," the officer hissed. Save it for court. When they dragged me outside, the sunlight stabbed my eyes. Dozens of people stood on the sidewalk, recording, whispering. "He didn't do anything," someone said. "Another one?" another voice muttered. I was pushed into the back of a squad car. In the rearview mirror, I saw my face, swollen lip, bruised cheek, and eyes full of something between rage and disbelief. I wasn't scared, just hollow. At the station, they chained me to a chair, asked the same questions again and again. "Who gave you the check? What's your plan? Who's your accomplice?" My answers never changed. "It's my paycheck." One younger cop shifted uncomfortably. "He doesn't have a record," he said quietly. "The check looks legitimate." The older one, the same who hit me, snorted. "Smart forgery's still forgery." I looked at him and said softly, "You hit me because I'm black." He smirked. "No, I hit you because I can." The words sank deep, colder than the punch. I sat there silent, realizing justice wasn't blind, it was just selective. 3 hours later, the door opened. A man in a gray suit walked in, holding a folder. "Internal Affairs," he said quickly. "We've confirmed the check's authentic. Issued by Monroe Tech, you're free to go." The room went still. The officer who'd hit me turned pale. The agent added, "And everything in that bank was recorded." Every second, I stood slowly, wrists marked from the cuffs. I didn't say a word. As I stepped outside, rain began to fall, light, cleansing, ironic. I tilted my head up, feeling blood mix with the rain on my face. I knew it wasn't over. That punch hadn't just broken my lip. It cracked open something bigger, the illusion that respect and restraint could protect me. They thought I'd walk away quietly, but that day, I promised myself one thing. If my silence kept their power alive, then I'd make noise loud enough for the whole damn country to hear. By the next morning, my name was everywhere, though not because anyone cared who I was. They cared because someone had caught it all on video. Me on the cold floor, blood running down my chin, an officer's fist still clenched. It had hit the internet overnight like wildfire. Tagged with a line that burned even deeper than the punch. He was just trying to cash his paycheck. I didn't even know it had gone viral until I stepped outside my apartment. Cameras, reporters, microphones thrust toward me like weapons made of curiosity. Mr. Vance, do you plan to sue? Were you resisting arrest? How do you feel about what happened? I felt nothing. Maybe too much to name. My face still ached, but the silence inside me hurt more. At work, no one said anything outright, but the looks said enough. My supervisor, Tom, called me into his office. He closed the blinds before speaking. Julian, I saw the video. I figured? They're calling from HR. They say it's bad optics for the company. Bad optics? I almost laughed. I got punched in the face for existing, Tom. He sighed, helpless. You know how these things get politicized. No, I know how they get sanitized, I snapped. People like me get assaulted, and people like you call it a complication. He didn't respond. He didn't need to. The meeting was already over before I left the chair. By noon, the clip had over 5 million views. Talk shows argued about it. Was it racial bias or a procedural mistake? Politicians tweeted condolences. Activists demanded accountability. The bank issued a statement. We regret the misunderstanding. The police department called it an unfortunate escalation. I called it what it was, brutality wearing a badge. Then, the message came. It wasn't from a reporter or a lawyer or anyone official. Just a text from an unknown number. You don't know me, but I was in that bank. I filmed everything. And you need to see what they tried to delete. Attached was a short clip, longer than the one online. It started before the cops arrived. The manager was on the phone whispering, "Yes, we have a black male here trying to cash what looks like a fake check. Yes, he's alone." Then the teller's voice. "Should we call the police?" "Already did," the manager said. "They'll take care of it." My hand shook as I watched. Take care of it, like I was a pest to be removed. Not a man, not a citizen, a problem. I sent the video to my lawyer, then to a journalist friend, then, for good measure, to every local outlet I could find. If they wanted to play quiet, I'd make it loud. By evening, the full story hit national news. The footage from inside the bank, the call logs, the matching timestamps. The narrative changed fast. It wasn't a misunderstanding anymore. It was a coordinated act of discrimination. The public outrage grew. Crowds gathered outside the precinct holding signs. Justice for Julian and cash, not crime. I stood at my window that night, the city below glowing with anger and empathy. I didn't ask for this. I didn't want to be anyone's symbol. But I knew that if I stayed silent, they'd write the ending for me. Another faceless statistic. Then came the phone call. "Private number again, Mr. Vance." "Yes. This is Captain Harris, Internal Investigations. We're placing the officers involved on immediate suspension pending review." "Suspension?" I asked. "That's it?" "For now." "Would I still be bleeding if I were white, Captain?" There was a pause, a sigh. "You'd still be cashing your check." I hung up. Later that night, I opened my laptop. Messages flooded my inbox, some angry, some grateful. One from a woman in Texas. My brother was beaten over a $12 receipt. They said he looked suspicious too. "Keep fighting." Another from a man in Ohio. "They did it to me in '03. Nobody filmed it." Nobody cared. Thank you for not letting them bury this. It was overwhelming. All that pain, all that solidarity. I sat there reading until my eyes blurred, and for the first time since that day, I cried. Not from fear, not even from rage, but because I realized this wasn't my story anymore. It was ours. When the tears dried, I looked at my reflection in the dark window. The swelling had gone down, but the mark remained, not just on my face, but in the system that made it possible. They called it a misunderstanding, I whispered to my reflection. Let's make them understand, and with that I began to plan. They say when the truth finally comes out, justice follows. But I learned fast, justice doesn't walk, it limps, and sometimes it never arrives at all. 2 days after the video went national, I was called into the local precinct for a formal statement. The irony wasn't lost on me. I sat in the same building where they had chained me, only this time there was coffee on the table and someone calling me sir. A different uniform, same system. The captain, a broad-shouldered man with thinning gray hair, smiled too much. "Mr. Vance, I want to personally apologize for what happened," he began. His tone rehearsed, his words too polished to be real. "This incident doesn't reflect who we are as a department." I leaned back. "Really? Because your man hit me before I said a word." "That seems pretty reflective to me," he exhaled slowly. "Internal Affairs is investigating. The officer in question has been suspended pending..." "Pending what? The outrage dying down?" I interrupted. His smile faltered. "You have every right to be angry." "I'm not angry," I said quietly. "I'm tired." That's worse. He didn't respond after that. He didn't have to. He wanted me calm, contained, to seem manageable. That's what the system always wants from people like me. Dignity without defiance. When I stepped out of the station, the air felt heavy, thick with the weight of headlines. Across the street, a small crowd had gathered. Reporters again. Protesters. One man handed me a sign that read, "No check is worth a punch." I didn't hold it, but I nodded. Because he wasn't wrong. That night, my lawyer, Amira Caldwell, came over with updates. "They're offering a settlement," she said. "The city's trying to bury this fast. Low 6 figures, full non-disclosure clause." I stared at her. "So they want me to sell my silence?" "They want you to move on," she said softly. "Julian, I've seen this 100 times. You win, they lose, but the story dies the second you sign. You'll have peace." "Peace without change isn't peace," I said. Amira sighed. "Then you'd better prepare for war." The next morning, the protests grew. People held my picture, my name, my story like a flag. Justice for Julian spread across every platform. For the first time, I felt the weight of eyes on me. Not suspicion, but expectation. They wanted me to speak, to stand for something. I went live online that night, my face still marked by the bruise that refused to fade. "My name is Julian Vance," I began. "I was arrested for trying to cash my paycheck. I was punched for asking a question. I was handcuffed for having the wrong skin." My voice didn't shake. "They called it a misunderstanding. But what happens when misunderstanding keeps repeating year after year, name after name?" The comments exploded. Support, anger, hope, hate. The whole spectrum of America in one stream of text. After the broadcast, Amira called. "You just went from victim to symbol," she said. "I didn't ask for that. Symbols never do." A week later, the officer who hit me, Officer Bradley, was fired. Not arrested, not charged, fired. The department called it a disciplinary action consistent with internal policy. That line played on every news channel. And every time I heard it, it made my skin crawl. The next morning, someone threw a brick through my apartment window. No note, just shattered glass and silence. I didn't flinch. I cleaned it up myself, but I could feel it. The backlash, the whispers online, the emails calling me a liar, a race baiter, a criminal pretending to be a martyr. The same country that demanded my story now wanted to bury it again. Amira urged me to lay low. "You've done enough, Julian." I looked at her. "That's the thing about enough, Amira. It's always decided by the people who aren't bleeding." That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat by the cracked window, the city lights flickering outside like dying stars. I thought about all the names before mine, names I'd seen on protest signs, hashtags, murals. They'd all started with one moment, one injustice, one recording, and then the world moved on. I didn't want to be another headline that faded when the next tragedy came. So I called a friend at the Tribune, a journalist I trusted, and told him everything. Not just the bank, not just the cops, the whole system. The silent culture that taught officers they could mistake black skin for danger and still sleep at night. He listened quietly. "Julian, if we publish this, it'll shake the department." "Then let it shake," I said. When the article went live, it was more explosive than I imagined. It didn't just name names. It exposed policies, internal memos, complaint records buried for years. It showed that Officer Bradley had 3 prior complaints of excessive force. All dismissed, the city erupted again. This time, not just in protest, but in demands. For oversight, for reform, for truth. I watched it unfold from my apartment window, sirens echoing in the distance, chants rising from the streets below. My phone buzzed with endless notifications. Amira texted me, "You just started something you can't stop." Maybe she was right. But as I looked out over the city, bruised, angry, awake, I realized something else. I didn't want to stop it. Because for the first time since that day in the bank, I wasn't the one on the floor. I was standing, and the whole damn country was finally listening. The city was louder now, not just from the protests, but from the conversation that refused to die. Everywhere I went, people recognized me. At the coffee shop, at the grocery store, even crossing the street. Some offered quiet nods of respect. Others whispered like I was something fragile, a story they'd seen on the news that somehow walked off the screen. Fame, I learned, feels a lot like exposure, bright lights that burn instead of warm. 3 weeks had passed since the article broke. The police chief had resigned. The mayor promised a full review of systemic practices. Reporters called it a cultural reckoning. But in my chest, nothing felt like victory. The bruise on my face had faded, yet inside, everything still throbbed. That morning, my phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. "This is Captain Harris," said the voice, the same investigator who'd called me after the arrest. "Mr. Vance, I thought you should know. Officer Bradley turned himself in this morning. He's agreed to cooperate in exchange for a reduced sentence." I froze. Cooperate? With who? With Internal Affairs? He's naming names. For a moment, I didn't speak. A strange mix of anger and pity rose inside me. He was scared. Scared of being left alone by the very system that had protected him all along. I hung up without another word. Justice, I thought, doesn't always roar. Sometimes it just quietly flips sides. Later that day, I walked to the protest downtown. The crowd had grown, families, students, workers, faces of every color. They carried signs that didn't just say justice for Julian anymore. They said justice for everyone, and that somehow meant more. I stepped onto the small stage someone had set up. I hadn't planned to speak, but the microphone was there, and so were they. Waiting, hoping. My throat tightened, but I spoke anyway. When this started, I said I thought justice meant punishment. I wanted them to feel what I felt, the fear, the humiliation, the helplessness. But I've learned something since then. Justice isn't revenge. It's accountability. It's making sure no one else has to go through this. The crowd was silent. Then applause, rising like a tide. For the first time, it didn't feel like they were cheering for me. They were cheering for what we all wanted to believe in again. After the rally, as the sun set over the city, Amira found me standing near the courthouse steps. "You did good up there," she said. I smiled faintly. "Feels strange being called good for just surviving?" "You didn't just survive, Julian. You forced them to see." "Seeing isn't enough," I murmured. "They'll watch, they'll tweet, and then they'll move on. They always do." She put a hand on my shoulder. "Then don't let them." That night, I walked home through the quiet streets. The air smelled of rain and smoke from the candles left burning on the steps of the precinct. I passed the bank, the same one where everything began. It was closed now, boarded up. Someone had spray painted across the boards in big white letters, "We remember." I stopped, staring at those words under the flicker of the streetlight. Remembering, that was all I'd ever wanted. Not pity, not fame, just the promise that what happened to me wouldn't disappear into the next headline. I touched the scar still faint on my lip and whispered, "Don't forget me now." Then I turned and kept walking, slow, steady, through a city that finally looked like it might be ready to listen. The city was louder now, not just from the protests, but from the conversation that refused to die. Everywhere I went, people recognized me. At the coffee shop, at the grocery store, even crossing the street. Some offered quiet nods of respect. Others whispered like I was something fragile, a story they'd seen on the news that somehow walked off the screen. Fame, I learned, feels a lot like exposure, bright lights that burn instead of warm. 3 weeks had passed since the article broke. The police chief had resigned. The mayor promised a full review of systemic practices. Reporters called it a cultural reckoning. But in my chest, Nothing felt like victory. The bruise on my face had faded, yet inside, everything still throbbed. That morning, my phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. "This is Captain Harris," said the voice, the same investigator who'd called me after the arrest. "Mr. Vance, I thought you should know. Officer Bradley turned himself in this morning. He's agreed to cooperate in exchange for a reduced sentence." I froze. Cooperate? With who? With Internal Affairs? He's naming names. For a moment, I didn't speak. A strange mix of anger and pity rose inside me. He was scared. Scared of being left alone by the very system that had protected him all along. I hung up without another word. Justice, I thought, doesn't always roar. Sometimes it just quietly flips sides. Later that day, I walked to the protest downtown. The crowd had grown, families, students, workers, faces of every color. They carried signs that didn't just say justice for Julian anymore. They said justice for everyone, and that somehow meant more. I stepped onto the small stage someone had set up. I hadn't planned to speak, but the microphone was there, and so were they. Waiting. Hoping. My throat tightened, but I spoke anyway. When this started, I said I thought justice meant punishment. I wanted them to feel what I felt, the fear, the humiliation, the helplessness. But I've learned something since then. Justice isn't revenge. It's accountability. It's making sure no one else has to go through this. The crowd was silent. Then applause, rising like a tide. For the first time, it didn't feel like they were cheering for me. They were cheering for what we all wanted to believe in again. After the rally, as the sun set over the city, Amira found me standing near the courthouse steps. "You did good up there," she said. I smiled faintly. "Feels strange being called good for just surviving?" "You didn't just survive, Julian. You forced them to see." "Seeing isn't enough," I murmured. "They'll watch, they'll tweet, and then they'll move on. They always do." She put a hand on my shoulder. "Then don't let them." That night, I walked home through the quiet streets. The air smelled of rain and smoke from the candles left burning on the steps of the precinct. I passed the bank, the same one where everything began. It was closed now, boarded up. Someone had spray painted across the boards in big white letters, "We remember." I stopped, staring at those words under the flicker of the streetlight. Remembering, that was all I'd ever wanted. Not pity, not fame, just the promise that what happened to me wouldn't disappear into the next headline. I touched the scar still faint on my lip and whispered, "Don't forget me now." Then I turned and kept walking, slow, steady, through a city that finally looked like it might be ready to listen. 6 months had passed since the day everything changed, and yet it still lived under my skin. Not as a wound, but as a pulse. The city had moved on, of course. It always does. New scandals, new stories, new names to shout about. But every once in a while, I'd catch someone looking twice when they heard my name. They'd squint for a second, trying to remember where they'd seen me before. Then it hit them. Oh, right. The guy from the video. The funny thing about being the guy from the video is that the world decides who you are before you can remind them you're a person. Some called me brave. Some called me bitter. Others said I should be grateful it made me famous. Fame, though, is just trauma with better lighting. I'd taken time off work. Mutual decision, they said. HR called it restructuring. I called it what it was, distance. The company didn't want headlines walking through their front door. So I spent my days teaching myself how to breathe again. Morning runs, quiet breakfasts, therapy sessions that felt like interrogations with kinder questions. Amira still checked in weekly. "How's your piece today?" she'd ask. "Louder than I like," I'd reply. She smiled once, sad but proud. "You're still standing, Julian." That's more than most. Still, the silence never truly lasted. One morning, I got a letter, handwritten, smudged with ink like someone's hand had shaken while writing. The return address was a prison in upstate New York. Inside, a single page. "Mr. Vance, you don't know me. I was a cop for 12 years. I quit after I saw your video. My partner used to talk like that, like your life could be taken care of. I told myself it was just words. But watching you bleed made me realize it's not the fists that break us first. It's the silence. I'm sorry I was part of it. No signature. Just the words. I read it 3 times, then folded it carefully and placed it inside a book on my shelf, Between the World and Me by Ta-Nehisi Coates. It felt right there, between pain and perspective. That night, I walked through the old part of the city. The bank where it all started had reopened under a new name, fresh paint, new management. But under the shine, I could still see the outline of the place where I'd stood with my hands raised, where my life split in 2, before and after. I stopped across the street and watched people come and go, none of them realizing the story buried in those bricks. For a moment, I thought about going in just to prove to myself that I could, but I didn't. Some ghosts aren't meant to be exorcised. Some just need to be seen. Back home, I made coffee, sat by the window, and opened my notebook. The same one I'd written my op-ed in months ago. The last page was blank. I started writing again, slower this time, not to be heard, but to remember. Justice is not a moment. It's a memory we keep alive. Not because it's easy, but because forgetting costs too much. Outside, the streetlight flickered. A kid on a bike laughed, his voice echoing down the block, a sound too free to exist in the world I once knew. I smiled, realizing maybe that was the point. Amira texted later that night. The department finalized the reforms. Mandatory bias training, new leadership board, independent oversight. It's happening. I stared at the message for a long time. Good, I typed back. Now let's see if it lasts. Before bed, I stood at the mirror. The scar on my lip was barely visible now, but I still traced it with my thumb. A reminder, not of pain, of purpose, I whispered, almost as a prayer. They hit me to silence me. But I made them listen. Then I turned off the light, letting the city hum in the background. Flawed, noisy, alive. Because maybe that's what justice really is. Not peace, not victory. Just the sound of people still fighting to be heard. A year passed before I realized the noise had finally faded. The protests had quieted, the interviews had stopped, and the world had found new battles to rage about. For the first time in months, I could walk down a street without someone pointing or whispering, "That's him." It felt strange, a kind of freedom mixed with invisibility. I wasn't sure which one I preferred. The city felt different now, though maybe it was me who had changed. The courthouse square, once filled with chants and cameras, now echoed with the softer sounds of everyday life. Footsteps, traffic, laughter. Life had reclaimed the noise, and I suppose that was the point. I still got letters sometimes. Some from people thanking me, some from those who wanted to remind me that I was lucky it hadn't ended worse. I didn't answer most of them. I'd learned that not every opinion deserves an audience. But one letter stayed with me, a short one from a mother in Baltimore. "My son saw your story. He's 16. He says he wants to be an officer someday, one who listens before he decides who's guilty." That letter made me sit in silence for a long time. Maybe, I thought, that's how change really works. Not in the noise of crowds, but in the quiet of one mind deciding to be different. Amira and I met for coffee on the anniversary of the incident. She smiled when she saw me, for the first time in a while, not the weary smile of a lawyer, but something genuine. "You look lighter," she said. "I finally slept," I replied. "That's something." "Yeah, took a year." We sat outside, watching the world move. Sirens in the distance, kids running across the park, sunlight reflecting off the courthouse windows. The same windows I once thought I'd never look at again. "You ever think it was all worth it?" I asked quietly. She took a slow sip of coffee. "The question isn't if it was worth it, Julian. It's whether it changed anything. Did it?" She shrugged. "You tell me." That night, I walked to the memorial wall downtown, the one people had built after all this began. It wasn't official, just something the community put together. Faces, names, stories, not all survived the system like I did. Some never got a headline. Some never got a chance. I stood there a long time, tracing the outline of a name with my finger. The paint chipped, but still bright under the lamplight. Someone walked up beside me. A young officer, maybe 25, still new enough to believe the badge meant something pure. "Mr. Vance?" he asked. I nodded. "I just wanted to say I watched everything. The footage, the hearings. You made me want to do this right, to be better than what I saw." For a moment, I didn't know what to say, so I just put a hand on his shoulder. "Then don't let it harden you," I said softly. "Don't let the silence win." He nodded once, and then he was gone, swallowed by the night. I stayed until the streetlights flickered out, the city falling into its familiar hum. The same streets, the same skyline, but somehow, it all felt newer, like the world had taken a breath it didn't know it was holding. When I got home, I sat by the window, my favorite place since all of this began, and looked out over the city. Somewhere out there, someone was still being judged before they spoke, still being watched before they acted. But maybe, just maybe, someone else was watching differently now. I thought of my father's voice, the one that used to guide me when I was younger, calm and steady. "You can't fix everything, son, but you can make them see it." I smiled faintly. "I did, Dad," I whispered to the empty room. "I made them see." The night was quiet again. Peaceful, but not final, and because justice never is. It doesn't end. It just passes forward, from one voice to another. I leaned back, eyes on the skyline, and said the words that had followed me through every fight, every bruise, every truth I'd been forced to tell. Different battlefield, same mission. Outside, the first light of dawn broke over the city. Not a new world, but maybe, just maybe, a better one.